Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this webinar where we will be looking at the value of the AEC collection for civil engineers. My name is Jacobus Oberholster. I'm an AEC and Procon technical consultant with Micrographics, and you can also check my email address there in the bottom left-hand corner if you'd like to get hold of me afterwards if you have any queries, if you need any sort of training or just any further information on the packages we discussed today or even beyond. So let's go and jump into our agenda. So first and foremost, we'll look at an introduction to the AEC collection. From there, we'll look at a brief overview of Autodesk InfoWorks, an overview of ReCap Pro. We'll look at some of the value for civil engineers, specifically from the AEC collection. We'll look at the value for structural engineers, specifically from the AEC collection. And initially, when I looked at the topic, I thought, we really should add structural engineers in here. So even though the title of the webinar is the value of the AEC for civil engineers, structural engineering can be seen as a sub-discipline of civil engineering. We tend to think of civil engineers uniquely dealing with infrastructure projects, but of course, to the civil engineering discipline as a whole, we have things like geotechnical, we've got structural, etc., etc., etc. From there, we'll pretty much end off with an integration with, well, basically a overview of some of the integration functionality across the AEC collection. And then, of course, as per usual, we will have our conclusion. Now, it's important that if you have any questions, you're welcome to pop them in the live chat. We do have that going, so at any stage you'd like to ask a question, please do so. It is very possible that, or not very possible, it is possible that if you're thinking of a specific type of workflow that I might not have an answer for you immediately, but in that case, I'd really ask you to please email me your query and I'll definitely get an answer for you as soon as possible. So, all right, let's jump into our introduction to the AEC collection. All right, so this is some of the products that are currently available. There's a larger list and we'll work through that list systematically. So bottom or top left rather, we've got the famous AutoCAD package. Now, honestly, what I love about AutoCAD to this day is that it is so integration friendly, that the data you get from within your AutoCAD software can be integrated into an absolute multitude of packages, which is really incredible. When it comes to things like 3D modeling and things like that, I think there are certain things that are a bit better within the AEC collection, right, like Revit and so forth, just because they contain a lot more data. It's more intelligent data, but AutoCAD is absolutely incredible. And of course, AutoCAD in itself is sort of like an overhead package. And then beneath that, we've got things like AutoCAD architecture, we've got AutoCAD mechanical, and so forth. Even things like plant 3D and those sort of things need to be kept in mind when we look at AutoCAD. And also AutoCAD forms the base for programs like Civil 3D and Advanced Steel as well. All right, so further to AutoCAD, we've got Revit, which is an incredibly powerful program, which is only gaining more and more developmental attention from Autodesk. Now, this is your, well, we call it BIM software, but this is where you can model incredibly intricate architectural models, structural models. We can even now, with incredible improvements to the topographical functionality in Revit 2026, we can even start looking at some earthwork components and things like that. But Revit is also incredibly, I don't want to say friendly, because I feel like that can be misleading in some senses, but Revit models can be integrated with a lot of different packages, which we will chat about a bit later. But Revit is really just your structural, in terms of, if you're looking within civil engineering, this is your structural modeling package. You can model steel structures, You can model concrete structures. You can do your rebar in there. There's been incredible improvements to the rebar functionality as well. And of course, we've developed ways to schedule that rebar accurately, especially in accordance with the South African code. So Revit is very, very popular amongst architects as well. But what happens is within the structural engineering industry that oftentimes when they approach, the architect would send them a Revit model, and from that they need to develop their structural model and then take it from there. Then of course we've got a powerhouse within the civil infrastructure suite, or the discipline, and that's Civil 3D, which is an incredibly powerful program, especially for your geography, not just geography, but also your geometric layouts of your services, your sanitary, your water lines, your roads, etc., and just absolutely a beast when it comes to things like intersections and so forth. So Civil 3D is a really powerful program. We will talk a bit more about Civil 3D when we look at the value for civil engineers section, but Civil 3D is a really, really powerful program. I'll talk about just some of the additional programs that you can get hold of to actually extend its functionality. So it's got some decent design capabilities, but when it comes to pressurized systems, especially like your water reticulation and so forth, you do need some add-ons for that as well. Then we've got one of the programs that we'll focus on today, which is InfoWorks. I will focus a bit more on that, so I'll just move on from that one. We've got Navisworks Manage, which is also an incredible program for the integration of multiple different model types from different programs. Very effective at clash detection and handling large models. And then what is cool, so here they say, if I look at the just the text underneath that, or to the right of the icon, they speak about 5D analysis and simulation software. But where the simulation comes in specifically is they call it 4D simulations, but where we look at your construction simulation and timelines as well, which can be really epic in planning things like when will you need to get large cranes in, how do you need to phase your construction so that your ready mixed trucks have access to all parts of the site that they actually need to get access to. I remember here in Port Elizabeth, there was a big project. I can't remember where it was in PE, but I remember they built this incredible boundary wall, really actually quite a very high boundary wall. And then what had to happen is they forgot, like, actually we need to pour some floors on the inside, and they actually needed to demolish a portion of this wall to get the ready mix trucks in and those sort of things. So Navisworks Manage, especially with that 4D simulation, can be of great help in simulating your construction timeline and seeing, okay, well, actually this was considered phase one, but maybe we need to shift that to phase two and so forth. Then we've got Advanced Steel, just an absolute favorite of mine, which is phenomenal for your structural steel modeling. Really an incredible program. It's based on the AutoCAD UI in many, many ways, but it integrates very, very well with Revit, and just a phenomenal, phenomenal program for your structural steel detail when it comes to portal frames, connections, and so forth. And we actually do provide an advanced steel fundamentals training course, which is really, really comprehensive. And then we support it quite extensively as well. Recently looked at actually creating custom profiles within Advanced Steel, and then actually getting Advanced Steel to create a flat pattern of those profiles. So that's exceptionally useful especially when you're working with your thin-walled elements. Incredibly, incredibly useful. So powerful program, but one that you really you really need to know it well to get the best value out of it, and it's got quite a steep learning curve. Okay, then we look at Insight. We'll extend that a bit shortly. We look at Format Pro. We'll give some information on that. Got ReCap Pro. We'll chat about that as well. Then we've got Robot Structural Analysis, which I think for a long time was just an absolute powerhouse in the structural analysis side of things and design as well. Unfortunately, its development has stagnated quite a bit over the years. and that does affect its quality, but still a program that I rate incredibly highly, integrates phenomenally well with Revit and Advanced Steel, and you can still get an incredible amount of value out of it, especially for me on the steel design side. It's incredibly powerful, and the fact that it's got an inbuilt wind simulator is super, super useful, especially when you're working with structures that don't really where um, the standard wind loading codes don't really tell you how to simulate wind flow around that structure. Then we've got 3ds Max, incredibly powerful program. Honestly, it is, my goodness, when you work in that program, it is vast. And I don't know if there's any one resource that can tell you everything that's contained within 3ds Max, but often used for 3D modeling and animation and so forth. And the cool thing is that, say, for example, so one of the workflows I've seen is that they simulate the turning of a wind turbine in 3ds Max, and that they actually pull that into InfoWorks, and so I can simulate these wind turbines in a specific area and simulate them turning, which is quite good as part of a presentation. Of course, you're not going to do like a wind flow analysis and stuff like that with it, but it's really good for demonstrating a concept to stakeholders. They've got Autodesk rendering. That's exactly what it is, just a rendering package as part of the AEC collection. We think of things like Lumion, Twinmotion, etc. And this Autodesk rendering is just one of the programs that you can use for your renderings. Okay, so just expanding a bit on some of the programs that we might not be familiar with. If we look at Insight, so Autodesk Insight, so we can see there underneath its name is just a building performance analysis software. You can see that within Insight, we assess the energy efficiency of buildings. We look at things like energy use, lighting, and carbon emissions as well. Okay, quite important in many parts of the world these days, especially if we think of Europe, is that we want to minimize carbon emissions as far as possible. Insight will give you insight into how environmentally friendly, in a sense, your building is. And you can imagine with things like your HVAC, etc., that there's a lot to be done in terms of improving the performance, the environmental performance of that building. Okay, from there, you can see that Format Pro has been replaced by Autodesk Forma. So Format Pro is still available up until, from what I understand, on the Autodesk website. It's still available up until 2027, I think. But I do know that its functionality has been extended and improved upon within Autodesk Forma, which we'll chat a little bit about shortly. All right, and then just highlighting the two programs we'll do an overview of. That's InfoWorks and ReCap Pro. So I do have those two programs open, and we'll have a look at them once we finish the introductory section. Okay, now moving on to some additional programming or additional programs as part of the AEC collection. We've got vehicle tracking, which we'll look at shortly. There you see highlighted fabrication CAD MEP, and you see that this focuses specifically on MEP workflows. So this is for the detailing, manufacturing, and installation drawings and layouts necessary for those MEP portions of a project. So MEP is, of course, your mechanical, electrical, and plumbing. Really something I would take a look at. From what I understand, it can integrate with Revit, which also has quite a large MEP component. But it's quite incredible. If you look at some of the data that's available online, you can see it's quite a powerful costing program as well. And then it can also be used for the clash detection of your MEP infrastructure. Okay, then we've got Autodesk Docs, of course, which links with the cloud, where it basically becomes something of a cloud-based data handling repository. So very, very cool. And then we have got a structural bridge design as well, which we'll look at in more depth shortly. Autodesk Drive, Autodesk Forma, like I mentioned, and then Twinmotion. Okay, just diving a bit deeper into some of these programs. So structural bridge design is used for small to medium span bridges. So you can perform a code-based design. So of course, South African codes are not supported, but I think Australian, American, and the Euro codes are supported incredibly well. And of course, now if you think of the adoption of the SANS 51992 in South Africa, we are expecting more of that transition actually to the Euro codes within the South African context. So that means that these programs are more and more useful to us within the South African context. Okay, now looking at vehicle tracking, that's quite a lovely program. So it's for sweep path or swept path analysis of steered vehicles. So that, of course, is your things like your trucks, your cars, etc., buses. You can look at light rail as well as aircraft. Now, of course, this is aircraft on the ground, so very, very important there. Now, further to its functionality, you have the design of roundabouts, parking lots, and it can also be used for airport optimization. So that's now with the taxiing of planes, with your support vehicles, etc., etc. So really a very cool program, also based or integrates with Civil 3D and AutoCAD, and we'll chat a bit about that a bit later down the line. Okay, and then just Autodesk Forma. So this, of course, falls into the planning phase of the life cycle, where we look at things like sun path analysis, preliminary wind analysis, as well as noise analysis. So put in between brackets their traffic, because what that does is you can actually make use of traffic data, and you can actually check if your building is built next to a highway, what is the noise effect in the building. So you can imagine if you have a design office and things like that, or you need actually a quiet space within a building, you can actually check what effect will the traffic have on the noise within the building. So very cool, but all preliminary planning phase events that you need to check for. Of course, from Autodesk Forma, you will go into your more detailed software packages like Revit and so forth. All right, so we're now looking at our overview of Autodesk InfoWorks. So where Autodesk Forma looks at buildings specifically, so that is the focus of that particular package. InfoWorks focus on the conceptualization or planning phase of civil infrastructure. So that would include things like bridges and so forth. So you see there, it works within or works around the civil infrastructure, railways, roads, bridges, etc. You can import and position Revit models, which is really incredible if you think about if you design a model or build a model within Revit, you can actually check with the use of InfoWorks, you can check how am I going to position this building and what is its interaction with infrastructure around it. So not just roads, but other buildings as well. And I actually have an InfoWorks project open, which we'll look at shortly. But you can imagine that if you had to take, let's say, I'm using a very silly example, but you are going to build a building underneath an overpass, right? Your normal survey will pick up the flat surface underneath the overpass on which you will build your building, but you might not know how this building interacts with the overpass above. So that's where that specific workflow of importing and positioning Revit models really becomes incredibly useful. You can just see how does its size relate to other things. Is it in anything's way? You'll see, especially with the model I'll look at now, we can see how that is going to be incredibly useful. Further with that, it integrates with Autodesk structural bridge design. So what can happen is you can convert certain portions of road within Autodesk InfoWorks to bridges. You can publish that civil infrastructure, and it creates files that you can then import into things like Revit and structural bridge design to take it from there. So very cool, incredible program for your initial conceptualization and planning. Really good to make use of this to actually present information to stakeholders. Very, very cool, and very easy to get the data that you need. I'll show you how that works. So it links with online-based GIS and CAD data. Now, what should be noted is that, of course, in the Northern Hemisphere, especially if we think of America, if we think of Scandinavian countries, the repositories of this information they have is incredibly detailed, which means that they get so much more value out of these workflows. It's relatively limited in comparison in South Africa. And it means that, of course, then the quality of your data is negatively affected. So, of course, what will happen is you'll have to go and see what data do you get within the South African space, and then can you actually use that data effectively in your project? I do believe that you can, especially when we look at the project, but that is something to consider. You can import the terrains generated within InfoWorks into Civil 3D and Revit, which is awesome, because oftentimes within Civil 3D, what we lack is sometimes the terrain data. Now, of course, there is a level of accuracy that you need to be aware of within InfoWorks. As we know, with any sort of GPS data and so forth, that there is a margin of error, but also really, really cool if that is what you've got. It is incredibly sufficient to get something on paper and to actually start running numbers. Okay, so we're now at our Autodesk ReCap Pro overview. So before we continue with that, let's jump into our InfoWorks. Okay, so here's a model I've actually just generated. And if you are familiar with my hometown of Gqeberha, or Port Elizabeth, as it was formerly known, you'll probably see that this is PE Harbour. So Port Elizabeth Harbour. You can actually see the harbour wall over there. You can see those manganese deposits, those oil tanks or fuel tanks over there, portions of the harbour, the Transnet building, some of the warehouses on the harbour itself. And we start seeing just that there's a ton of data. Now, usually what the problem is that, okay, cool, I can see it, but can I interact with it? And the answer is yes. So as I pan my model, you'll actually see that we've got three-dimensional data. Of course, this is for preliminary planning phase infrastructure. So this is not super detailed, so very important, but this gives you a very good idea of what you are working with. Now you can see here is the Barkens Valley. So again, if you are familiar with Port Elizabeth, you can see that valley, the valley wall there. And you can see all these roads and all these buildings, as well as these rivers, can be interacted with. So we can interact with a lot of the data that is captured within this space. So if I click on a road, for instance, you can see it actually gives me the name of the road, which is flippin' epic. So there's Valley Road. If I click on this guy here, South Union Street, this is part of Govan-Beki, I think. Strand Street, Barkin Street, South Union Street. Okay, this should be Warmer Boulevard. So if I click on that, there we go, Warmer Boulevard, and so it goes on. If you click on buildings, you'll get some information. Of course, this is just sort of placeholder features, just so that there's some representation of what the building looks like. This does not tie in with what the building looks like in real time. So just important that you'll see that this is just sort of a representative building. The volume is relatively representative of what you will find in real life, but here is the Donkin. You can see there, that's not what a Donkin looks like. Okay, so you can change some of the data and how it appears, but this is quite the data, or the visual representation of that building is relatively generic. Okay. I see there's just a question. Afternoon, does one have to manually insert the contours? Not at all. This comes stock standard. I'll actually show you how to create a terrain, or how to actually create a model. and you'll see there that this is excuse me, this is what I got. I didn't have to change anything. This is what the program generates for me. Okay, so I'll show you how to create a model shortly. Okay, so what's interesting, or what's cool, is that some of the buildings does the name of the building is actually recorded. So if we go down here, okay, so this is the Algoa building. So Algoa FM, so the radio building, that doesn't have a name, but this down here is Bridge Street Brewery, and this should be, I think, what is this place's name? It's a restaurant. If I click on that, yeah, its name hasn't been recorded, but I know its name. If I click on that building, you can see that this is Bridge Street Brewery. If I click on other buildings, you can see that they don't all have names. But where that information is available, that building's name is recorded. So for instance, down here, this is called the Tramways. If I click on that, you can see it actually records Tramways building. Of course, if you are working in the area up here, then of course a lot of this data is not necessary, it's not really applicable. So what you would do then is you'll have more focus on this area here. You can see that unfortunately it doesn't create 3D models of everything. So that's just something to note. You can actually see, okay, there are some buildings here that don't have a 3D model. You can then copy and place buildings on top there. So I'd highly recommend you use this alongside something like Google Earth, so you can just correlate data and see, okay, there are buildings here. I need to make sure that I have some sort of a volumetric representation over there. But in this case, we can see, okay, this is green space, and you can, of course, then import a Revit model and place it over here. Now, imagine now with the harbor, it's actually hard to see. We don't see the cranes so easily. I can see them there. There are cranes there. But you can imagine, like over here, we have all of these containers and things like that. If somebody gave you some coordinate for where this building must go, and you place it over here, or you import it, because you can actually place it with its coordinates, which is really cool, you'll know, like, nah, this is a problem. Like, it shouldn't be here in the middle of all these containers. So really, really useful and incredibly, incredibly powerful program. Okay, so let's just quickly look at how do we create something like this. And then I'll come back to just working with bridges. So what you'll do is, if you go to Home, you'll click on Model Builder. And it will pick up more or less where you are in the world. So you see there's Cape Town, but there's Nelson Mandela Bay. You can see there's the harbor. So I might look at another area. Let's see. Okay, so here's the airport. Okay, so maybe I want something like this. There are multiple ways you can select current map extent, and it will of course tell you whether or not that extent is too large to create a model from. But in this case, I would like to just draw a rectangle. You can see there's polygons, and you can actually import a polygon, which is very cool. But I'm just going to draw a rectangle. So we've got Humwood extension there. We've got that airport. You can see it actually gives you the extent of the area, so the number of square kilometers. I'm going to click on that. I'll say this is PE airport and surroundings. I can give it a description, and then we need to apply a coordinate system. So the LL84 works for me in this regard. Then I click create model. Okay, so it then says this can take a few minutes. When complete, it will be available on InfoWorks Home, and you'll be notified by email. Okay, so I can then close this. So where you see Port Elizabeth Harbor, that Port Elizabeth Airport and surroundings file type will be listed here. So I'm going to continue on with the rest of my content, and then I'll look out for the notification that that file has been created. It takes a few minutes for that to happen. But okay, going back to Port Elizabeth Harbor, I just want to show you, if you take a piece of road, you right click, and you need to convert that to a component road in order to model a bridge. So very, very important. So down here, I've actually already done that. You can actually see, if I go underneath the model, you can see that pier. You can see some of the girders, you can see the abutments and so forth, and you can modify this quite, you can do a lot of modifications over here. And then from there, you can export this. So if I select the bridge, just sometimes a bit of a pain to select, but in that case, I've selected the bridge. You can, of course, change its name. I can then right click and I can publish civil structures. Okay, so very important. That's the process you need to follow. You need to then give it a proper coordinate system, so you can't just refer to LL84. And then you can actually import it into programs or link with programs such as structural bridge design and Revit. You might need some additional add-ins, so just be aware of that you might need to install add-ins into things like Revit and structural bridge design in order to import the data that is generated from within InfoWorks. You can see here that if I select this, okay, this is just the road. So I actually want to make sure that I select the bridge. So let's go for that. So with the bridge selected, you can modify the number of piers. There's the length and so much more. You can even model in things like culverts, etc. Really very, very cool. If I select a portion of road, you can see that its attributes of function, maximum speed, lanes forward, lanes backward, elevation, lifespan, etc., etc. Very, very, very cool. Incredibly powerful. You can add things like city furniture, which is your signs, hydrants, etc., etc. You have drainage, so pipelines, culverts, pipeline connectors, additional buildings, tunnels, etc. You name it. Incredible program for that initial planning phase. Okay, I've just received a notification that that model is done. So I'm going to go to home. There is that PE airports and surroundings. So I'm going to open that. Okay, I'm just waiting for that to load. Okay, I'm just going to save it on local for now. But you can link it with Autodesk Docs, which might save a lot of space on your device, which is really, really important. Okay, just waiting for this guy to load. I think it's quite a big model, so it might just take a bit of time. Okay, we're almost there. Hopefully just got a few more seconds left, and then we get to see our model. Again, this is quite a large one, so I think it really is within your benefit to make sure that the area is not bigger than what it needs to be. Okay, so we're getting there, we're getting there. All right, we see it happening. Okay, let's just have a look. Okay, cool. There we go. And so you can see this is quite a flat area, but you can see there are those contours. Okay, I think, like I mentioned before, we do expect some inaccuracy. I mean, if you look at that runway, I'm like, oh my word, you'll be as sick as a dog at the end of that runway. Um, I think that is just a problem with the triangulation and so forth. So just something to be mindful of. But you can see we've actually got the airport here. We've got our parking. That is actually where you exit, I think, the large parking area. Just, I'm not getting this wrong, am I? Yeah, there's the airplane and so forth. This should be, I always get this road wrong. They call it 3rd Avenue, but isn't this like, there we go, Alistair Miller, that's right. Okay, so there's Alistair Miller and so forth. There is this sorry, I just need to get used to the controls. You actually rotate and pan your model by holding and left click, not just your mouse wheel. You can see here's that informal settlement, so there by Airport Valley. And yeah, so this is really great for that. Again, just getting a Revit model in here, seeing how it interacts with things. So you can imagine, okay, this is the Air Force base right here, or Army base. You can imagine that if, for instance, in this green space, you build a really large structure, that the fact that you're aware that this is an airport is super useful. Of course, you would be aware of that even um, without um, without what's his name um, without this you'd be very aware that there's an airport here. But again, you can conceptualize just your interaction with the surrounding infrastructure with with this data. I see that from Paul Storm, so InfoWorks is very inaccurate, but the contours can be overwritten with other survey data. So thank you so much for that, Paul. Yeah, that's incredibly useful. So yeah, like we saw with this runway, that data is not great, but like Paul mentioned in the chat, that can be overwritten with other survey data. But again, a lot of cool data that you can get from InfoWorks, and it comes stock standard with the AEC collection. So why wouldn't you want to use this? Really beneficial in getting to know how to use this incredibly well, and then to take it from there. All right, so that's Autodesk InfoWorks. Let's just continue on with our overview of ReCap Pro. So looking at ReCap Pro, so this is a point cloud and drone footage processor. So you can process point cloud data within ReCap Pro. So you can use ReCap Pro to mesh that data and to export it to usable formats, which is really, really useful. You can also make modifications to large point cloud models. So sometimes you get a lot more data than what you need, and you can then actually modify that data in ReCap Pro so that you keep what you need and exclude what you don't need. You can integrate with Revit using the type of data that ReCap Pro generates. However, when you import that data into Revit, it will still remain point cloud data in a sense, in that it won't have any intelligence of its own. So that's why I put in there that it's for tracing only, meaning that you can use it as a reference for actually building up a Revit model from that point cloud data. Then you can also use ReCap Pro for the capturing of drone footage, which is really cool, meaning if you get drone footage with LiDAR, of course, with a drone with LiDAR capabilities, you can take that footage of a structure and actually create a 3D model from it, which is really very, very cool. It is token based, unfortunately, which really, really is, oh man, it's such a pain in that you need to buy tokens for this, and the tokens aren't necessarily cheap. So what I would recommend in this regard is chat to us, man. Chat to us. Let's see if we can help you. Sometimes what I think is really frustrating with the token system is that you maybe used a service provider to get you this data. You then go to ReCap Pro believing that this data is exactly what you need to generate exactly what you need. And then you find, man, something is messed up here. The type of data that the drone generated wasn't sufficient enough, or the photos were not actually taken with LiDAR capabilities, etc., etc. So chat to us beforehand. Let's see if we can help you not waste tokens. So please chat to us about that. But barring that, really, really incredible program. So let's just take a quick look at Autodesk ReCap Pro. So this is the homepage. I've got a couple of projects. You can see there's photo projects and so forth. If you go to new project, that's where you work with things like point cloud data and so forth. So it's quite a simple interface. You can see what Autodesk is using in the background is actually a workshop. And that point cloud is so dense that you can actually see machinery, you can see a vacuum cleaner, etc. To be honest with you, I can imagine that there would be cases where your data needs to be this detailed, especially if you're doing renovations to existing infrastructure, etc. But in general, there is a level of there can be a level of overabundance in a sense where you have way more information than what you need. And that really is where ReCap Pro comes in, the processing of the data, getting rid of the stuff that you really don't need. In the case where you have like existing services, then of course something like ReCap Pro is really great for identifying those services and making sure that you don't accidentally intersect these services during your just during your design phase. Of course, then the program is only as good as the data source. I've received models with millions upon millions of data points, which becomes tricky to handle just because it's quite a lot of data to handle, but then it's intricate, it's detailed. And then I've received files with, oh my goodness, with such a small amount of data that you're really not getting anything distinguishable from that data. So that's very, very important. Use a reputable company that has a track record of capturing this kind of data for you, so that when you get to ReCap Pro, you know that what you're doing or what you're using is going to be useful. I think I just want to reiterate that cloud-based data is not a one-click wonder. There is groundwork in terms of actually building up that model. There are some AI tools coming out that, well, what the idea is that you can process your point cloud data in these AI tools in such a way that the AI tool actually identifies that, oh, this is a wall, this is a window, etc. And it creates that 3D geometry automatically for you. Man, that stuff, I think that stuff is still quite far off, but just something to take note of. If you ever use this kind of data in something in Revit, like I mentioned previously with the tracing, you can use that point cloud data, you can snap to it, which is really, really cool, but you still have to draw your walls, you still have to draw your slabs, etc. You just use that point cloud data as something to snap to, as something to reference your model. So just please be cognizant of that. If people make very big promises in terms of what you can do with point cloud data, please contact us and just ask us, this is what we need, this is what people are saying, is this true? And if we don't know, we don't know. We will be open and honest about it, but we can really help you in terms of just making sure that you don't get that people don't overpromise, and that you don't get something that you pay a lot of money for that you actually can't use in the end. So very, very important when it comes to point cloud data. I'm not hating on point cloud data. I just think that there's a lot of groundwork that's still involved with getting it to something that is usable, and we need to stay aware of that. Okay, now we're looking at our value for civil engineers. So this is just going to be a quick section. So we look at something like Civil 3D, where you can design civil infrastructure, your sanitary systems, your roads. Civil 3D really supports some incredibly complex geometry, especially when I think of your roads, your overpasses, your intersections, and those sort of things. Really an absolutely incredible program. A program with an incredible amount of features, but with a very steep learning curve. So I always recommend making sure that you get some training on the use of the program, that you get maximum benefit from it. So Civil 3D's functionality can be extended with the Innovize packages. So that's things like why is the name now oh my goodness. Things like info drainage, there we go, info drainage and those sort of things. Oh my goodness, I just hit the complete blank. But info drainage and those sort of things extend its design functionality incredibly. If we look at those kind of packages, we can look at things like master planning. So your sewer master planning, your water reticulation master planning of massive metros and those sort of things. Things like flood routing, swales, etc., retention ponds, etc. Those sort of things you can like I mentioned, you've got Civil 3D as the base, but you extend its functionality with things like the InnoVise packages. I must say that Civil 3D's design capabilities do require some add-ins, so it's not a plug and play type of thing under under all circumstances. So when it comes to pressurized networks and things like that, you actually do need add-ins for that. There are um, packages out there that you can make use of, extensions and so forth. I'm thinking especially of things like Procons ProNet as an extension that adds that design functionality, that analysis and design functionality for water reticulation systems that we might want. So please chat to us about that. Like I said, it's when you have Civil 3D, that's fantastic. There's a lot you can do with it, but on the design side, you need to take cognizance of the limitations with it, and that you might need an additional package to add that design functionality that you might need. The InnoVise packages are phenomenally powerful, but they are expensive. So just keep that in mind. Okay, quick look at value for structural engineers. So we've got Revit and Robot really together create an incredible workflow for structural engineers, where you can do your modeling within Revit, create an analytical model, which that workflow has been incredibly improved upon since Revit 2025.2. And then you can actually export that into Robot. You can even do direct integration with Robot, and then from there perform your designs. Although this isn't a it isn't a what it is a two it is two-way integration, meaning you can go from Revit to Robot and then Robot to Revit. When it comes to the from going from CAD to analysis, the workflow in my mind, a useful workflow, is only one way, and that is from CAD to analysis and not from analysis to CAD. And that's because the programs had two different modeling philosophies. In your analysis side, things work on center lines, shear centers, and everything needs to be connected. Whereas on your CAD side, you're modeling as something will be built. Okay, so that's your construction type modeling. And on your analysis side, it's analytical type modeling. So very, very important. The workflow is fantastic in one direction, but not necessarily in the other direction. If you need some more information, that please feel free to reach out. I'll happily expand on that. Okay, so with this, you can analyze an incredibly vast, or you can model an incredibly vast range of structural models. Essentially, I would say unlimited, but I say that tongue in cheek. So in Revit, you can model steel structures, concrete, rebar, and so much more. You can look at your timber, etc. Basically, if you can create a family for it, you can model it, right? Then you have your integration with robot structural analysis, like I mentioned, for your analysis and design. And the analytical functionality within Revit has been built upon. So you can now do your loading, I think load combinations as well, if I have it right, which I would not recommend at this stage because you have to go and undo it in robot anyway. Okay, so that's just something to keep in mind. But I think it's giving us a bit of an indication of where they're going with Revit, but we're not 100% sure at this stage. Then a package I would love to mention again is just Advanced Steel, which has got incredible steel modeling workflows. It is currently under maintenance, which means that it's not being developed anymore. You will have things like Advanced Steel 2027, 28, and so forth. So they'll still bring out the newer version so that it integrates or works well on your operating system. However, if there's a particular bug or something like that, it will remain there. Of course, with that, at some point in the future, Advanced Steel might be discontinued, but we haven't received any indication of when that would be. And if we go back to, I think InfoWorks was the program, Autodesk actually puts out information saying this is when the program will be discontinued and so forth. So please don't write Advanced Steel off. A really wonderful, wonderful program. Advanced Steel also integrates very well with Revit and Robot. And so, I mean, at this stage, Revit's steel workflow is nowhere near that of Advanced Steel. So it's worthwhile actually building your steel model within Advanced Steel and then exporting that to Revit and then doing the rest there, such as your concrete, wood, etc., etc. The integration with things like Revit and Robot require an add-in that you can go and download and install from the Autodesk products page. So very important there. It's not there natively, meaning that when you install Advanced, that integration isn't there immediately. You have to go and install an add-in. That add-in is completely free, so just keep that in mind. Okay, and with our last section, we'll just look at a brief overview of the integration across the AEC collection. So InfoWorks, so bi-directional, you can take an InfoWorks model to Revit, and then you can take a Revit model into InfoWorks, and then from Revit you can go to Robot. Of course, if you have that terrain within Revit, it will be utterly useless within the Robot, and it will most likely be excluded from the transfer. So just something to keep in mind there. InfoWorks, you can go to Civil 3D, so you can take that terrain file into Civil 3D, and then with InfoWorks you can also integrate with structural bridge design, which is very, very cool. Then your integration with AutoCAD, I say almost everything just because its integration is vast. I mean, you can take a DWG into Revit, into Robot, into Civil 3D, into other packages from other collections such as Inventor and so forth. And of course, beyond Autodesk, AutoCAD can integrate with a ton of other packages. So just, I'll say almost everything. It's not the case, but it integrates incredibly well. It's very, very friendly on the integration front. Then ReCap Pro, so that integrates with Revit and AutoCAD. So AutoCAD has actually got some very, very cool cloud processing functionality, which I'd highly recommend you check out if you can. Really cool stuff, cutting sections through. One of the things I remember doing in AutoCAD was actually cut a section through a point cloud and then have AutoCAD actually generate the line, a line on that section, which is really cool. So you can create a nice little section view there, which is cool. And you actually get a polyline from that, which is lovely. And of course, if you trace that data within Revit, you can actually create an analytical model from it, which you can then take into Robot. Advanced in the Revit, bi-directional transfer, very, very good. Something I'd highly, highly recommend if you work with structural steel. Then Fabrication CAD MEP is an interesting one. So like I mentioned earlier, that is for your detailing, costing, your installation drawings, and so forth, and in your MEP side. And then from what I understand is you don't take that data necessarily into Revit, but you can take Revit data into Fabrication CAD MEP. Then we've got vehicle tracing. That should be vehicle tracking, but that data, or it serves as more of an add-in or an extension, and that can integrate very nicely with Civil 3D and AutoCAD. There's some cool short clips, like 9-minute clips on YouTube on exactly how vehicle tracking works. And I think it's brilliant. I had a short look at some of the stuff, and I thought, wow, that really is useful. If you think of, I mean, if you've ever been driven into a parking lot that you're like, this does not work, right? Vehicle tracking can be incredibly useful for stuff like that. Light rail is also supported, and of course, your your airport optimization on things like your aprons, etc., etc. So vehicle tracking is definitely something to look out for. It's got a lot of data built into it, and luckily in this case, it's American in that it's got those AASHTO standards, which is something that we make use of in South Africa as well. So that's quite cool. We don't necessarily need a country kit for that, but just to be mindful that there are other countries that are also supporting vehicle tracking, but it's just something to check out and to be mindful of, to not just go gung-ho and start simulating things. There might be some things that you need to change or set up to get them to align better with maybe some of the more modern South African standards. And then we've got Forma, which I mentioned earlier. So that's specifically for your buildings. So where, again, where InfoWorks, we're looking at predominantly civil infrastructure. Again, you can check how structures interact with one another in terms of the physical space that they take up. But in Forma, you can do things like sun path analysis, you can do a preliminary wind analysis, as well as noise and so forth. So that's quite lekker. So imagine now you have a residential area, you're building a massive skyscraper, and it just casts a humongous shadow on this area. That's the kind of thing that you'll be able to see in Forma, and it's bi-directional. So you can take Forma information into Revit, and you can take Revit information into Forma. And then lastly, just as a quick mention, of course, Revit to Navisworks. Now, Navisworks is basically a data handling program or model handling program where you could integrate models from many different programs, do things like clash detection and so forth. And a really useful program, quite a popular program, but I didn't expand too much on Navisworks, just that in general, I imagine we would get right what we need within the programs that I mentioned before. But however, Navisworks is great for things like clash detection, walkthroughs and simulations and those sort of things. So predominantly, I think as structural engineers and civil engineers, we're not too interested on walkthroughs and things like that. So that's why I'm mentioning Navisworks just at the end. And that I think it's quite useful for your architects and so forth, so they can present some more information to the stakeholders. I mentioned also Inventor between brackets, so that's not relating to Navisworks, but however, it relates to Revit, in that Revit and Inventor can integrate with one another. Now, where that's incredibly useful is if you, for instance, you model your pump station, so the concrete component, the roof and stuff like that, you model within Revit, you can actually take that data into Inventor and vice versa as well. So it's super useful. So I remember having to do some CAT ladders. I had a Revit model, so an architectural model. I pulled that model into Inventor and I could actually position my ladders very, very accurately, which was awesome. So I really love that workflow. That's why I'm mentioning it. Inventor isn't part of the AEC collection, but it really is such a nice workflow that I thought I really, really just had to mention it. All right, so this is an overview. There are way more integration workflows that you can look at within AEC. And so, of course, if you are interested in integrating any two packages or integrating some data with another package, please get hold of us so that we can help you. We can do some of the testing on our side as well and tell you this is the kind of integration you can expect. This is the kind of data loss that you can expect, or this is the benefits you get, etc., etc. There's a lot to cover actually, and we're already at an hour for this webinar. But it really is an incredible collection. I do feel like within the industry that, especially in South Africa, the AEC collection is terribly, terribly underutilized. And I know that the reason for that often is that we don't necessarily have the time to get to know how new software packages work. We don't have time to troubleshoot integration issues. So why is this thing not displaying in InfoWorks, etc.? But I really, really, really highly recommend actually getting to grips with what is a part of your collection, first and foremost. And then if you're using any of these programs, even if you're using two of them, the AEC collection is vastly, vastly more cost effective than buying these programs as standalone. So please do give this a thought, give some of the integration a thought. If some of these programs have workflows that can really benefit you, please chat to us. I mean, we can even map an integration workflow. How will we integrate this program into your existing workflow, etc., etc. But don't miss out on unlocking some seriously cool features within the AEC collection, especially if you already have access to it. And then, like I said, if you're looking at anything else within the AEC collection, think twice before buying a standalone. The collection is incredibly cost effective, just if you're using two of all of those programs. All right, so with that, we can conclude our webinar. So thank you so much for watching. Please feel free to reach out if you have any queries. You are welcome to just go back to the beginning The recording will be made available online. You're more than welcome to go back to it, check out my email address, and send me an email if you have any queries whatsoever with regards to what we covered today or any of the other software packages that we support as well. If you haven't already, please remember to subscribe to our channel, like this clip. It really goes a long way in getting our free content out there for people to see. So thank you again. Hope that you have an awesome afternoon and a lovely week.